Howdy, I heard you like videos. If you're not already watching on YouTube, you should toddle on over to YouTube and you should subscribe to Post-Mortem Video, all one word, and you should click subscribe, and you should click the little bell, and you should select all when you click the little bell, and whatever other hoops that YouTube now has you jump through in order to actually be subscribed. Basically, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hello lovelies, this is the Anyworld tabletop role-playing system. It's a generic RPG. Myself and T-Shirted Historian talked to the creator over on T-Shirted Historian's channel. Go and subscribe there for the Week in Geek and Dungeons and Discussions. So yeah, full disclosure, we talked to the guy, backed the project, and so it arrived. So yeah, full disclosure, although that ethical stuff we learned about during Gamergate. So it's a generic RPG, and generic RPGs tend to have problems in that they're a jack of all trades and a master of none, that they try to accommodate everything and they can't, that they get bogged down in the minutiae of all different settings and they don't do any particular setting particularly well. They tend to get hobbled by their own hubris, if you will. I mean, take a look at GURPS, for example, a fairly simple system at the heart of it all, but then all the modifications and everything, all the merits and flaws and powers and oddities that you get from all the supplementary books tend to kind of mask the elegant simplicity of the underlying system. And the same is true of Tristat. The other way things can go is that just completely inapplicable game systems can end up applied to particular game worlds. The D20 glut, we saw that. We're seeing a lesser sort of reincarnation of that, with everyone trying to make everything look like 5th edition D&D, or just using the 5th edition D&D system to make their game. I mean, there's supposedly a newish version of D20 Modern based off 5e coming out, and one of the worlds they seem to have grabbed the license for is Pacific Rim. How is that going to work? Not very well, in all likelihood. So yeah, that's the problem. So as a system, this game by Netherborn Games, created by Anthony Smith, who we talked to, it's situated around the sort of Savage Worlds sort of level, I would say. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Savage Worlds. The Savage Worlds system is a development from the system that was used for Deadlands. I love it for Deadlands. I don't love it for anything else. And this is kind of in the same sort of space in terms of crunch and feel, at least as much as I could get a feel for it from reading it and running a couple of sort of solo experimental scenarios. It has a comprehensive contents, but no index. And so it's primarily focused on the interpersonal level. It's not so much about the big flashy vehicles, the spaceships, the giant robots, that sort of thing. It's much more the individual hero or the squad of heroes doing things. It has a few peculiarities that we could go into, I guess, as we move through. But let's start with the system. Okay, so you have a set of core attributes: strength, toughness, agility, precision, mind, and spirit. These are ranked typically from 1 to 10, and these are described as such. That basically, though there are modifications, gives you the number of d6 dice that you roll. 4, 5, 6 is a success, 1, 2, 3 is a failure. It is a dice pool. You tot it up, compare the number of successes that you've got against a target number of successes. If you equal or beat that, you succeed. If you blow past it, you do better. One of the dice is the fate dice, which works similarly to in the d6 system, if you're familiar with that. If you roll a 1, you get a setback. If you get a 6, you get an advantage. Even if you fail, you can get an advantage. Even if you succeed, you can get a disadvantage. 6s explode, so you roll them again or grab more dice and roll those on top, giving you the potential to get additional successes. You can get a runaway critical success, meaning that even if you're shit, you have a tiny chance to succeed even at the most difficult of tasks through luck. That's the basic core of the system. You get modifiers to the rolls that you make, so you might get a penalty. So the number that you need to roll for a success might go up if you're disadvantaged. If you're advantaged, then it might go down by 1. So advantage, disadvantage. Most people are familiar with that from 5th edition D&D now, but in this instance, it just increases or decreases the difficulty number for you to succeed. Edge is basically it's a pool of points you can spend that allows you to be more heroic. So you can gain advantage, remove disadvantage, or re-roll a failed check, so long as you didn't roll a 1 on the fate die. So that allows fate, even though the fate die is something different, it allows fate to intervene, luck to intervene. Here's one of the peculiarities of the system. You don't have a list of skills, things that you're good at or bad at. It's just not really a thing. What you have is a pool of skill points which you can spend to boost your chances of success. If your background, if your kind of character class, description, whatever you want to call it, if it's applicable. So if, I think the example here is a rogue might spend skill points to pick a lock or charm a guard, whereas a warrior might use skill points to intimidate or land an attack. And that allows you to add an extra dice. So skills are kind of incidental, they're not core to the system. Sorry about the pauses there, I was just trying to find specifically what it does. But yeah, it'll give you an extra dice to roll. So they're kind of incidental to the whole system. Your core statistics are really the be-all and end-all of your character for the most part. We have scale rules, different size of things, creatures, vehicles, whatever. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it does make some. You have a base evasion score, so that's the base level 1, 2, or 3 that's needed to hit you from combat without you actively dodging or whatever else. In combat, you'll roll to attack. The weapons will modify those rolls. And then someone makes a toughness check. So this could slow down play a little bit. You have 5 wound levels, but when you're hit, you make a check against the damage to reduce it, if I'm remembering correctly. And then if there's any damage left over, you roll 3d6 and you take away the remaining damage, and that gives you a result from flesh wound, no damage, up to injured. If there's additional damage that carries over, e.g. if you roll 0 or less, then you go on to roll on the injury table, and that gives you some proper severe damage, and you will lose potentially health levels or die outright. So that can slow things down a bit, I think. It's kind of similar to the way in which storytellers damage and soak work, but with the additional step of what injury did I take. Madness is presented here. I view that as an optional system, but it's presented as part of the core system. Like, if you want to reduce the amount of damage that you take, you can opt to take more stress and madness instead, but you could still lose your character from that. So that's something that can happen. Attribute levels, they've got different arrays basically of stats, a balanced character, 443333, mixed 543332, specialist 643322. And 6 isn't, considering that the stats go up to 10, 6 isn't particularly high. After your array, you can pick your archetype. You could expand this, but there's like someone who's gifted, someone who's flexible, someone who's skilled. The skilled one can increase one attribute by +1, so you could start out with a maximum stat of 7, I suppose. And then you get experience points to customize your character from there. There are traits which are kind of like some of the background modifiers in the Iron Kingdoms RPG. They're the one that's their own system, not the D20 version. So these are little quirks and specialities that modify your core roles. You don't get too many of these, so it does avoid the problem that Savage Worlds and Tri-Stat get into, where there's so many different modifiers and conditionals that it gets really bogged down. So these are kind of like low-level special abilities, I guess. Your character's essence is kind of what defines what you can spend your skill points on to a degree, and also when the games master should award you edge points, which are typically handed out for good role playing, that sort of thing. So it's just a pair of words, which again makes me think back to the Iron Kingdoms RPG, where you got two careers and you mingled them together to create your character, but it's much less influential here. Plus you can have flaws, so negative sides to your character, things that can be used to add disadvantage to one of your rolls but give you an experience point, but it's limited, so it doesn't necessarily screw you up too much. Advancement is relatively slow. You can choose to start at higher levels. The problem for me is the disjunct that, because it's so attribute focused rather than skills and other capabilities, an adult human being will already tend to be at a high attribute level, but because it combines attributes and skills, it feels like you can't detail your character enough or make them competent in the ways that you would really want to, and yet at the same time they're statistically weak starting out in a way that they wouldn't. I mean, the highest strength you can start at potentially is 7, for example, whereas if your character is meant to be a great big hulking brute who spends every hour lifting, it's hard to start with a character sheet that reflects that. But yeah, gear is determined by GP, which isn't gold coins, gold pieces, but gear points. So that makes it more easy to transfer and customize and think of the value between different settings and ideas and so on. They have a damage rating and they have particular traits, and you could even potentially customize weapons with different traits taken from other things. Sorry, qualities, not traits. So, for example, piercing ignores 1 point of armor. Impact ignores 1 armor if benefiting from bonus damage gained from charging. So very specific. You can see where things are going to start to get bogged down there. Scoped range weapons have no disadvantage to long range. Armor qualities here, we've got resistant, +1 armor against damage from a particular damage type, so maybe it's resistant to acid or whatever. And these all provide modifications to very basic, very generic equipment, which is another one of the kind of pitfalls of having a generic system that doesn't tie into any particular world. Of course, you can maybe modify that a bit when you customize the world, but there isn't that much room for that much customization and individuality of weapons and so on. Abilities are, again, something that really comes across as more of an optional system. These are things that break the sort of cinematic real world, which is the base. So these are things like superpowers. Some of these could be special abilities of particular equipment, like force fields or flame pistols. It's superpowers. It's things that are beyond the normal, like shape-shifting and so on. You could use these to represent particular spells or other capabilities like that in a fantasy game, or superhero powers, or science fiction technology, all of that sort of thing. So the vehicle rules are pretty basic, pretty scant. Essentially, vehicles are treated as special cases of normal character, so they take damage in a similar way. They have a scale that doesn't make that much difference to things. They tend to have inherent armor. Condition is basically how many wounds they can take. And there's not a lot to it in particular. There's some decent chase rules, but vehicles are lacking a bit and feel like they could do with a bit more development. Rules for mass battles, which is always a nice, useful thing to see. And they talk about using the rules to do miniature skirmishing. This is the other thing that it reminded me of reading through it. The original Rogue Trader Warhammer 40,000, slimming down the rules a little bit, you could easily use this to run skirmish games in practically any setting you wanted, much as you could have done with Rogue Trader back in the day. We have some pretty standard Games Master advice. It's all fairly useful if you're new. Not sure that many people buying this are going to be new to gaming, but there you go. Ideas like using tarot cards to generate adventures, which is something I've done in the past. Collaborative storytelling is presented really more as an option rather than the default, which is nice as well. We've got some tables for inspiration and ideas, some particular kinds of genre that you might want to do, things you might want to emphasize in those sorts of settings. Fantasy, horror, post-apocalypse, space opera, zombies, all of that sort of thing. So plenty of options and ideas there. The Outer Realm is their kind of thing that links their various different worlds together. So that's the closest thing you really get to a proper setting here, and what it really is a link between the different worlds that you could play using the game. There's some examples of characters, some standard array NPCs. This stuff is always gold with any game. It's always nice to have a good variety of generic NPCs and a few example monsters. So yeah, that's always nice to have. They're all fairly basic, fairly scant, but it's a generic system, so you expect that. There are various traits that monsters might have. And then some more specific examples here, and some more characters that you could play with in the back. It's not an open system, unfortunately, because I might like to use it for something. But I'm sure they'd be amenable if you asked them and wanted to use the system. Whether it will get any traction, I don't know. So style, I love black and white. And this rush to make everything full colour in a lot of games has been a bit kind of disappointing to me. I think you've lost something in presentation and artistry, and certainly black and white makes things easier to read. The writing's clear for the most part, easy to read through. The rules are easy to grasp. The style of the game is kind of at the heroic end. I would compare it to Savage Worlds, like I said, or the D6 system in how I think it will feel as you play. It's clearly been influenced by some of these other games. No index, which is unfortunate, but the contents is pretty good. I still would have liked to have an index to look up individual things much more easily, alphabetical order, it's a thing. But since I often skip indices in my smaller books, I can't really complain too much. How many pages is it? So discounting the character sheets, it's 150 pages, so it's probably about 160 pages. Yeah, the artwork's nice, it's striking, black and white. I really appreciate that kind of graphic design. So, yeah, no complaints there from me. In terms of substance, it's a generic game, so there's a lot of ground to cover, which you can't necessarily cover particularly well, but it does it okay over the amount of pages that it's got. Plenty of food for thought. If you're a kit bashing games master, you know, it's good. So, style, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 for style. I think it needed a stronger voice and a stronger angle, but I do love the way it looks and it reads well and everything else. So 4 out of 5 for style. In terms of substance, it's a generic RPG. They're hobbled when it comes to substance. I think aspects of it could have done with a bit more expansion, maybe a bit less games master advice, or less example characters, things like that. You could have got rid of those, and you could have expanded things like the vehicle rules, or provided more context and advice for running the more super powered campaigns, or games that stretch the bounds of the generic system. In terms of substance, it's a difficult one, because it's not going to be like a game setting book. It's not going to have that kind of content. It does have a lot of the rules you need, but it by no means covers all of its bases. But then that's probably impossible anyway. So I'm going to give it a 3 for substance, but a high 3. So that's a total of 7 out of 10, or 3.5 out of 5, but closer really to a 4 out of 5. I think there's something good here that's worth exploring, particularly for one-shots. There are peculiarities to the system, like the lack of importance of skills, that may throw a few people off, but I think underneath all that there's definitely something worthwhile here, and I wish them every luck in getting some traction with this system, and hopefully releasing other interesting stuff with it. And hopefully at some point I'll get round to running a demo game or something of it. We'll see what happens. Zach.
Satana Station is an addition to Machinations of the Space Princess. It's a whole sleazy space station, full of locations, services, adventures and inspiration for your old school space opera games. Over 100 locations, a bevy of non-player characters, and more plot hooks than you can shake an Arcturan mega stick at. Buy it at post-mort.com, drive-through RPG, and hard copy at lulu.com.